Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Life here, and today we're going to be looking at some of the best bloomin' games that are available for the Switch that well, you may not have heard of because the Switch eShop is bloomin' packed these days, isn't it? Some of it's great, some of it's absolutely great, and that's what we're going to be talking about. But it can be hard to find the great stuff in amongst all the... what's a nicer word for rubbish? Naturally, this is not an exhaustive list, because otherwise we'd be here until Christmas. This is just a few of the games that we have seen and, we've played and reviewed very highly over on NintendoLife.com, but have actually, the reviews themselves have garnered lower interest overall and lower numbers for whatever reason, and we think maybe they deserve a bit more of a fair shake. Call them hidden gems if you will, that's just not very SEO friendly for some reason. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling, let's dive right into things. Let's start things off with the Talos Principle. This is a game that had, I've got to admit, it totally passed me by as well, somehow. To properly describe the game in sort of big sweeping statements would probably be doing it a disservice, and at the same time, if I were to actually go in the detail necessary, it would probably spoil some of the game. Oh, it's a bit of an odd one. The very basic principle is that it is a first-person puzzle sort of wandery around type game. That may not seem like anything exceptional at first, but it's the execution and the world building that makes this stand out. Again, don't want to go into too many details, but suffice to say, things are a little bit complicated, things are extremely Greek and modern and robots, and It's just bizarre from start to finish, but it's absolutely wonderful and a really engrossing and really well-realized world. The storytelling is largely hands-off, and the story it's largely what makes this such a memorable experience. The gameplay, don't get me wrong, the gameplay is still good as well, and the puzzles are largely really engaging and can be quite tricky, but without ever feeling like cruelly difficult or just frustratingly annoying. It's top stuff, it really is. Visually, bit of a mixed bag, but it does allow you the option of performance mode and graphics mode if you want a prettier experience and don't care about frame rates, or if you like the frame rates. I went with performance. If you've been on this channel for a while, then you'll no doubt know of this one. Yes, West of Loathing. I've talked about this game before, and I'm about to do it again because you know what? I'm just still so bloody surprised how many people haven't heard of this game, because it's an absolute corker. What would likely be described as the primary gameplay is the combat, which is a relatively straightforward turn-based affair. I mean, there's some interesting little wrinkles going on, but nothing out of this world. But where the real draw for the game is in its humor and its presentation and just the way that you explore the world and the people, and oh god, I could gush about this thing for days. If you've ever heard of an old web browser game called Kingdom of Loathing, unsurprisingly this is made by the same people, and the almost entirely black and white aesthetic with stick figures and everything, I mean, you could argue that it looks relatively primitive, but it's so consistent and so well done that I think it's actually quite appealing. I don't know, maybe I'm biased. Suffice it to say, if you like dry, sarcastic humor, you are not going to go wrong with this one. It's just an absolute riot from start to finish. What do you call a Metroidvania where you can fly? You call it Forma 8. This was a game I originally played back on the Wii U, which feels like an absolute lifetime ago, and it's still just a very unusual and very unique kind of little mini Metroidvania indie delight. You fly around as this ball, and even though every instinct in my body says that Metroidvania you shouldn't be able to fly, I mean, you could even argue that this game is almost kind of like a top-down perspective kind of game, because you can just fly around freely. I mean, it's not, but it kind of behaves like one. The wonderful, simple, clean art style and the beautifully realized atmosphere really help to sell this as being something different, rather than just being another kind of Metroidvania game. You ever heard of a little thing called Downwell? Because I certainly have, and I play it pretty semi-regularly. This is one of those games that's very simple to pick up, but very difficult to master. I mean, I suppose you could argue that it is kind of a roguelike, maybe, but that really, it doesn't really seem to completely fit that bill. It's much more arcadey than that. You'll be jumping down, well, if you can imagine it, in a very simple black and white art style, but kind of a reverse palette to West of Loathing, so that's a thing. And you'll be using your gun boots to make sure you don't fall too quickly and to be defeating enemies, and you'll be trying to get a high score and try and progress as far as you can. It's a very simple premise, but it's so slick and so beautifully executed. This is the kind of game that I love to just pick up and play for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes at a time, and usually on my Lite as well, which doesn't actually get an awful lot of use. I bought it because, well, I could kind of justify, oh, it's for work, I said, and I don't use it as often as I should. Doesn't help that I can't really leave the house at the moment. You may well be looking at this game and thinking, what? And I'll be brutally honest, I was thinking the same thing even when I first picked it up. It's one of those bizarre games that, even if you see it in motion, if you look at a screenshot, it says nothing. If you look at it in motion, you're kind of like, okay, well, I can kind of get what's going on, but you really have to experience it firsthand to really understand this game, because it's just so bloody bonkers. Surrealism and clean, crisp art styles really are my jam, but this is so far beyond jam, it's flipping Marmalade. You're basically just kind of moving around, sometimes doing some very quick and straightforward, I suppose arguably sort of rhythm-based quick-time events, and if you fail, you only go back really quite a tiny amount. It's a very forgiving game and very high score focused, but without sort of bogging it down too much. It's not an especially long game, and I don't imagine it's going to be for everyone, but if you're looking at this psychedelic acid trip and thinking, I'd like me a slice of that, you will enjoy this. It is just so far out there, so crazy, just so bizarre, and yet so ethereal. It's an experience. It's not even really a game, it's an experience. From very simple gameplay to arguably quite complex gameplay. Yes, Steamworld Quest. If you know anything about me and, well, the rest of Nintendo life generally, we are absolute suckers for the Steamworld series, and this is the latest entry in the series, and it, as is pretty standard for the guys at Image and Form, completely different to all the other games. The best way that I can describe the gameplay for this is kind of how Paper Mario Color Splash should have been. You basically have like a deck of cards and they get drawn randomly, and each card has different, sort of characteristics and different attacks and things like that. It's, sort of as a concept, it's not completely out there, but the execution, as with pretty much every other game on this list, is just sublime. It's just a wonderful, original, turn-based RPG, and I absolutely love it. I don't really think I can give more praise than that. Steroids Binary Stars is a game that seems to keep popping up in my life, and I don't fully know why. At first glance, it's a relatively simple shmup, but it has got some seriously good stuff going on behind the scenes. When you grab your first weapon pickup, you may well go, hang on, this is one out of how many weapons? Yeah, there are a lot of weapons in this game. And it's kind of a roguelite, maybe a roguelike. I'm never fully sure of the description these days. But even so, it's one of those games where you really have to just sit down and do as much as you can, and realistically, you're probably not going to get as far as you'd like. It's just another classic example of generally sort of well-trodden ideas, but arranged and executed in such a way that just makes it an absolute joy from start to finish. And just so refined and just, it's just so much fun to play. And last on our list, we have Cube 2, or as I'm never sure how to pronounce it, maybe it's QUBE2. But probably not. If you're looking at this first-person physics-based puzzle game and you think, hang on, that bears a subtle resemblance to a game like Portal, then you'd be right. This game absolutely reeks of Portal. And that's not a bad thing. Rather than portals, though, you've got these cubes that you interact with your special super fancy suit, and you can, sort of propel yourself, you can draw blocks out, and, sort of mismatch, you can spawn things, and it starts off very simple, but very quickly starts to get more and more complicated, and yet at the same time, it never seems to put a puzzle in front of you that is completely outlandish and would take you ages and ages to work out. It's very fair. Not entirely dissimilar to the Talos Principle thinking about it. It also manages to inject a healthy amount of context and story as well, which is something that you wouldn't necessarily expect for a puzzle game like this, so it's very welcome. It just helps to have something that grounds you into the experience. Its influences are painfully obvious, but it's an amazing amount of fun, and there's nothing else quite like it on the Switch, except maybe the Talos Principle, but at the same time the puzzles are quite different. And there you have it. That is just a handful of what we consider to be some of the loveliest... And there you have it. That is just a handful of what we consider to be some real hidden gems, some real lovely things that may well have passed people by. How many do you already own? Why not let us know with a comment down below? Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, then why don't you scrabble around in the dirt and maybe find that subscribe button gleaming as lovely as it is, and be sure to check out nintendolife.com for all sorts of lovely Nintendo related content. Thank you again for watching. Bye bye.